I have a secret, one that I've been carrying for more than a decade. My name is Ryan, and I am a man in my late 20s. I am here today to share my story not as an expression of self-pity or a plea for empathy, but with a fervent hope that it might echo with someone who might be traversing through the same convoluted path as mine. The story of my life has its roots in my childhood. I was raised in a strictly religious household. The fabric of our familial system woven with the threads of traditional values, where the topic of sex was an unmentionable entity, much like a phantom dwelling in the attic. It was the forbidden fruit, not to be talked about, not to be probed into. This veil of silence surrounding the subject of human sexuality manifested in a rather conflicting way, leading me to the discovery of masturbation during my adolescent years. It all started as an innocent curiosity, a voyage of self-exploration into the uncharted territories of self-pleasure. With each clandestine exploration, I found a sanctuary, a place of solace from the world that seemed judgmental and harsh. It was a comfort, a consolation that I could resort to, a secret that I could claim as my own. However, with every fleeting moment of secretive pleasure, there was an overwhelming wave of guilt that swept over me. The guilt was as overpowering as the forbidden pleasure was alluring. It was a constant conflict within me, a clash between the desperate craving for ephemeral pleasure and the fear of everlasting damnation. This guilt, this feeling of profound remorse, didn't fade away as I aged. Instead, it grew, it thrived, akin to a monster that was feeding off my insecurities, my fears. The guilt began to cast a long, ominous shadow the course of my life, a shadow as tangible as the secret I was carrying within me. As I weaved my way through the complex maze of my 20s, this shadow, this remorse, became my unwelcome companion. It was unshakable, omnipresent. It trailed me to my college, it found its way into my workplace, it even seeped into the foundations of my relationships. It gradually morphed into an integral part of me, of my identity that I was too terrified to acknowledge, too petrified to confront. I was living with this guilt, this remorse, and I was living in constant fear. Fear of being discovered, fear of being judged, fear of confronting the truth. It was as if I was wearing a mask, a facade to hide my true self, and the burden of this mask was becoming unbearable. This guilt wasn't just a feeling, it was an entity that was slowly consuming me from within. Years passed by, but this guilt, this remorse remained deep-seated, etched in the core of my existence. It was like a shadow, a constant, relentless shadow followed me to every nook and corner of my life. But the guilt never left me. It was like a shadow that followed me everywhere. You might be thinking, it's just masturbation, what's the big deal? But for me, it was a big deal. As time went on, what started as a simple teenage curiosity turned into a ritual, a habit, and eventually an addiction. I was living two lives, one that everyone saw and another hidden, consumed by guilt and shame. Like a clandestine operative, I'd mastered the art of deceit. My addiction was my darkest secret, something I kept under wraps from everyone, including my partner. A secret life filled with guilt and shame, which I bore alone. Our intimacy began to suffer. I found myself lying to my partner, covering up my tracks, making up excuses, anything to keep my secret safe. I was consumed by fear, the fear of being found out, the fear of losing the love of my life, the fear of being seen as a failure. I was caught in a cycle of guilt and self-loathing. Every time I succumbed to my urges, the guilt would set in, gnawing at me from the inside. I promised myself that it would be the last time, only to break that promise again and again. This cycle of guilt and broken promises was my constant companion, a dark shadow that followed me everywhere. My addiction was like a wall, separating me from my partner. It was an invisible barrier that kept us apart. I could see it affecting our relationship, but I felt helpless, trapped in my addiction. I longed for a deeper connection, but my addiction kept getting in the way. The double life was exhausting. I was constantly on edge, always looking over my shoulder, always worried about being found out. It was like I was carrying a heavy burden, one that was slowly crushing me. I wanted to be free, to live openly, to be honest with my partner, but my addiction held me captive. It was like I was leading a double life, and I was tired of it. I knew I needed to change, but I didn't know how. The words echoed in my mind like a broken record. Each day I'd wake up with a renewed determination, a resolve as solid as a rock. This is the last time, I'd tell myself, clenching my fists, my teeth gritted, but the resolve would crumble like a castle of sand against the relentless waves of my addiction. The guilt, the shame, they'd wash over me again and again, eroding my willpower, my self-esteem bit by bit. I was a fighter battling an enemy within me. An enemy that was cloaked in the shadows of secrecy, thriving in the darkness of my denial. The battlefield was my mind, and the weapons, my thoughts. I'd arm myself with promises, with vows, but they'd shatter at the first onslaught of my addiction. And each time I fell, I'd pick up the pieces of my broken promises and try to mend my resolve, only to see it crumble again. The frustration was overwhelming, a constant companion that added fuel to the fire of my despair. Each failure was like a punch to my gut, leaving me winded, defeated. I'd look at myself in the mirror and all I could see was a man trapped, chained by his own desires, a prisoner in his own body. But the worst part was not the failure, not the guilt, not even the despair. The worst part was the feeling of being stuck, of running on a treadmill, going nowhere. I was trapped in a vicious cycle, a merry-go-round of addiction, where each round was a painful reminder of my inability to break free. I yearned for change, for a life free of the shackles of my addiction. But the path to change seemed elusive, shrouded in the fog of my confusion, my fear. I knew I had to break free, to escape the prison I had built around myself, but how? How could I fight an enemy that was a part of me? How could I change when I didn't know how to? I was trapped in this vicious cycle and I didn't know how to break free. It was time to break the silence, to ask for help. The decision to do so wasn't easy. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, bracing myself for a leap into the unknown, but I knew this was the only way forward. I needed to take this step, to finally admit to myself and others that I was struggling. I'll never forget that first conversation. The fear, the embarrassment, the uncertainty. It was like ripping off a band-aid that had been stuck on for far too long, but I was met with understanding and compassion. My loved ones didn't turn away. Instead, they offered their unwavering support. I also sought professional help. It was a daunting prospect, opening up to a stranger about my most intimate struggles, but the therapists were understanding, non-judgmental, and equipped with the tools to help me navigate through my addiction. The sessions were challenging, forcing me to confront my emotions and beliefs head-on. But with each one, I felt a little lighter, a little more in control. Each step towards recovery was a battle, but it was a battle I no longer had to fight alone. The support from my loved ones and the professional help I received was like a lifeline, pulling me out of the depths of my addiction. My journey to recovery is still ongoing. There are days when the urges are strong, when the guilt and fear creep back in. But I've learned to recognize these feelings for what they are, part of the recovery process. I've learned to be patient with myself, to celebrate my small victories, and to reach out when I need help. Gratitude has become a constant companion on my journey. I'm grateful for the support I've received, for the progress I've made, and for the hope that now burns brightly within me. I'm still on my journey to recovery, but I'm hopeful. And for the first time in a long time, I feel free. I'm not just surviving, I'm learning to live again, and that to me is the true meaning of recovery.